So what has followed me home today? Well, it's a Technics SL-J92 linear tracking turntable, which is extremely dirty and smells terrible, but the seller stated that it does work. So let's see what it'll do. And sure enough, it does power up. So that's a good start. So something that's clearly going to be a problem is the platter mat. So you can see it has some discoloration on it, and that's because over time, if these aren't stored properly, some of the petroleum products in them that make them soft and pliable leach out and look like oil on the bottom of it, but are actually just those chemicals. And what it does is what it leaves behind is about as pliable as a saltine cracker. So it's unlikely I'm going to be able to salvage this, and that's a problem because it's kind of a proprietary mat because it has this big hole in the middle to clear the 45 RPM adapter. So I gave it a scrub with antibacterial wipes, and it was so nasty. There's a lot more to do, but I thought I would start my exploration on the bottom, and it looks like removing the bottom just involves taking out these 4 screws that are in the middle of the rubber feet, and the feet actually look like they're in good condition. And with the feet off, the cover does indeed lift right off to reveal the workings of the turntable. So it's a lot cleaner under here, having been sealed inside, but I'll have to have a good look around. So before messing around with things too much, I thought I would check the speed and see if things are in the ballpark. So 45, that is really close. And 33 is not bad either. That is impressive for this turntable right out of the box, so to speak, whatever box it was in. So to get a look at the mechanism on the top side of this turntable, I need to remove the lid. And to do that, I need to remove these 2 fasteners on either side of the turntable. And sort of an automotive style fastener, there's a peg that goes into another piece that then goes into the lid. So you need to pry these out, and you can use a tool or you can use your fingers. So I pulled the middle pin out of it like that. And then I need to get this part out. So that's the bottom one. The top one has a longer pin to it. And then this part here, actually there's a rubber bush on this too, makes up basically the hinge for the lid. So the top pin on the other side, the hinge part of it actually was broken, so I need to see if I can find a new part for that. But now the lid should come off. And it does. Now we can take a closer look at the mechanism, and this does not look good. It actually looks rusty on this side, as if maybe this side of the turntable was in water or something. So need to check all these parts and clean them. So this is the drive belt for the motor, the stepper motor that moves the tone arm across, and I can feel, I mean, it's still there, but it's kind of dry, so this probably needs to be replaced. But I can manually move the tone arm using this. So I have to say this mechanism is much sturdier than it was on that other realistic turntable. This is all steel and is strongly attached to the base of the turntable. I have to give this all a nice clean. This rod that slides on, it's gummy back here. I have to clean up this gear and this part right here. So I cleaned this part already, but you can see as the mechanism slides across, it's left this trail, like a snail trail of chunky dried up grease. So all that's got to go. So WD-40 seems to have worked the best to clear up all of this dried up grease. So now I'm going to move the tone arm over by hand. So I can get to the other part of the mechanism on this other side. So that cleaned up pretty nicely. The rail here, these surfaces, and the gears over here. So I've seen that people replace the grease that was all gummed up on these surfaces here, but I'm not really sure if that's necessary because a piece of paper, actually a double thickness piece of paper, slides under these. There's no resistance at the bottom part and a little bit of resistance here at the top part. So I'm not sure that that grease is necessary. It might actually inhibit the movement of it. So for now, I think I'm going to leave it as is. I am going to lubricate this rail. So I saw that some people use a silicone-based oil, so I'm going to use that there. And on this gear here and this drive gear, I'm going to use just a little bit of Super Lube synthetic grease. So this is the corner and the hinge that was all rusty and corroded. So I didn't show this, but I removed the hinge with these 3 screws right here and let it soak in some Evaporust. So this stuff is incredible in its ability to remove that corrosion. Although if you leave things in too long, as I did, it'll also remove the paint, but I don't think that looks too bad. Also, there's 4 springs in the rubber feet. And the feet themselves are in good condition, but some of these springs were also rusty, and they also cleaned up really nicely. So that's a big improvement there. So in the middle of the turntable is this 45 RPM adapter on a cam that turns. So to get the platter off, first you have to remove this. So it's in the pop-up position. I'm going to push on these plastic tabs here, push it in so that it will pop up. You got one side and the other side. And this pops out. And now the platter is supposed to just pull out. But it feels really tight. So I'm going to squirt some WD-40 in here, try to loosen this up, and then hopefully it will pull off. Okay, so let that sit a bit, and finally, we get lift off. So I cleaned up some of the filth. It looks a lot better. But you can see that this is actually a pretty substantial platter with a proper Technics direct drive motor with the magnets being part of the platter, just like its bigger siblings like the SL-1200. So to lubricate a Technics direct drive motor, you get oil in from the top. So I happen to have the special Technics oil. So basically you get it into the gap here at the base of the spindle and then work that in. Okay, so this platter mat is not going to work. It is hard as a rock and not suitable for playing records. So I had a thought that I could just remove this black plastic 45 adapter and put a standard mat on here, since this is rarely used anyway. But that isn't going to work because there is ridge right here that goes around here. So even if this adapter was not here, it would still be on top of this ridge. So the mat on here is slightly smaller than normal. It's about 11 inches. I happen to have a mat that is about that size, but of course it does not have that central cutout. So what I can do is cut an appropriate sized hole in the middle of this to clear both the 45 adapter and this ridge on this platter. So I measure the outer diameter of this ridge at 45.7 millimeters, so let's call that 46. So to make the best circle I can, I'm going to start with a standard 45 RPM adapter, then wrap tape around it until I can get this to the right diameter, then place that in the middle of the mat to cut the hole. So 3 layers of thick foam tape have gotten me just about to where I need to be. So now I'm going to use a different turntable to hold the mat while I cut the hole. I'll put a piece of plastic down for protection. Put that there. I'm going to trace around the adapter with a pen to make a nice circle. So I'm going to do it off camera so I don't mess it up, but now I'm going to cut along this line with an X-Acto knife, but because it's on a platter, I can turn the platter and hold the knife still rather than the other way around. So I took my time and went around for several revolutions, and it's not perfect, but it's certainly not terrible, and it fits pretty well on the turntable. So to remove a P-mount cartridge, normally there is a screw that goes in from the right side here, but it's actually the opposite way here. So reading the manual, I was able to find that the way that you remove this, because you can't access the screw apparently from here, is you move the carriage all the way to the middle, and then that will allow the tone arm to move down, and now I have access to the screw. And now it just pulls out. There we go. And like just about everything else about this turntable, it looks terrible. So should I replace the stylus on this or replace the whole cartridge? So a new cartridge like this with an elliptical stylus from Audio-Technica costs about $40. You can get a replacement stylus for a little bit less, but I don't know if it'll work based on the condition of this cartridge. So I'm going to remove this. It pulls like this. And I'm going to just soak, just like you're doing your dishes, this piece in some distilled water, maybe with a drop of dishwashing liquid to dissolve some of this dirt. It won't hurt this, just water, and see if I can get this cleaned up. So I've given that a good soak, and it looks better already, but now I'm going to gently clean this in and around the stylus, and then let it dry out, mount it, and see how it works. Unlike many other higher-end turntables of its era, this one has completely detachable cables, which is a great thing. So the power cable, which it came with, the RCA cables, which it did not come with, and that's not a problem, but also it has a grounding cable. Now, I had one of these Technics once before, and I actually ordered a custom-made ground cable because this is a sort of proprietary plug to replace the one that was missing, and it was kind of expensive, but I later found out that there's a much easier solution. So the size of this hole is exactly the same as a banana plug for a speaker. So take one of these, attach whatever wire you want to it. Should be a braided wire, not a solid wire, and you're all done. So now on to the linear tracking motor belt. So the old belt is stretched out and dried out, so I need a replacement. So instead of purchasing one belt that's supposedly the correct size for about $10 or $12, I purchased the entire package of belts, 30 to be exact, for $7. So this needs to be a square profile belt. So the one that I put in there temporarily was a flat belt like this one, but a square belt will fit and stay in the groove of each of these pulleys. So from my assortment, I made sure to order ones that would have one of the appropriate size. I picked one that fit, and it seems to work pretty well. So you can see how the motor is going to make small adjustments as it moves the tone arm across the record, and this seems to be working perfectly with no slippage. So it's playing the first song of the record. So on the front of it is some buttons. Looks like a fast forward and rewind or a next track button. So I'm going to click this button here. So it goes to 1. It moves back to the right and moves over, and it finds the groove between the songs. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to pick up, it resets, it moves over to the next one. And with the correct belt in here, it seems to be very precise and is working perfectly. So the stylus on this cleaned up really well. I looked at it under a microscope and it looked pretty good, and it sounds great, so I don't really feel the need to replace it or doing anything else with this cartridge. And I'm pretty satisfied with the lubrication of this as it is, so pretty much the only thing that remains is to reattach the lid. So one of the fasteners that was in the top corner of the turntable was missing, and I tried to find a replacement and was unsuccessful. I don't think those fasteners are proprietary to Technics, but I did try some different ones and wasn't able to get one that worked. So I decided to take it in a different direction, which I think will work fine, but was kind of difficult. So I did it already, and I'm not sure how I would have filmed it, but I'm just going to show you what I did. So what I decided to do is replace both fasteners on either side at the top here with screws and nuts. So with the lower fastener removed, the turntable lid will tilt somewhat up, so it'll make a gap between the mechanism part and the lid that I can get into. So what I did was take 2 M3 screws, each 12 millimeters long. I put the rubber bushing back in the hole and then inserted from the left and the right the screws, put it through the metal tang on the mechanism here, and then put a nut on it. So you can see the nut down there, and that took quite a bit of doing. I had to use long tweezers to reach down in there to put the nut on. I try to get a little bit of Loctite on it too, because I think they're going to have a tendency to loosen up, but they certainly are holding okay now, and they're not really under that much tension because once the lower pin is in, the whole mechanism is pretty firmly attached to the lid, so it's not just pivoting on those. So that was pretty difficult. Did that on both sides. Again, you can see there. It took some fiddling, but I think it'll be a good solution. So with the top one done, I can now reinsert these. So I'm gonna line that up. And this is the inner part. And now for the pin. And there we have it. So this turntable primarily needed a really good cleaning. So now it looks a lot better. It smells somewhat better. So I only had to replace a few parts. The platter mat, so I can get rid of this potato chip. The drive belt for the linear tracking mechanism, and of course the plastic fasteners, which I replaced with screws, and the ground wire. So it's now working perfectly, and this turntable has some really neat features, particularly the optical sensor that finds the gaps between the tracks and allows you to skip tracks just like you were using a CD player. So I think this is the third linear tracking turntable I've worked on, and I have really liked them. I understand why they fell out of favor, but is this really more complicated than a typical automatic turntable? Well, yes, it has 2 motors, one for the drive and one for the tone arm, but it doesn't have that whole Rube Goldberg mechanism to move the tone arm back and forth and up and down that a typical turntable does. So it's electrically more complicated, but in some ways mechanically simpler. So I understand why they kind of fell out of favor, but I think this deserves another chance, this concept. And this Technics, this isn't the top of the line, but you can feel the quality of this piece when you're working on it. So it's been a pleasure to get this thing back working. I look forward to listening to some records.